Welcome to the Theotherapist Podcast, where theologically trained, licensed therapists share health and healing conversations. Join our host, Dr. Catrice Glenn, for conversations about real-life issues from both theological and therapeutic perspectives. Each week, we speak to guiding questions with real-life application, humor, and engaging guests to share meaningful dialogues with our listeners. Let's begin.
Welcome to the Theotherapist Podcast. I'm Dr. Catrice Glenn. This is episode 5 of the Theotherapist Podcast. We're so glad that you have joined us today. I have one of my favorite folks in the world joining us today for the podcast. And we are having a great conversation this whole month on relationships. And today our guest is the Reverend Dr. Christina Jones Davis, LMFT. She is someone that I have shared lots of time with in my Doctorate of Theology program in Pastoral Care and Counseling. We both were in that program together. And now she, of course, is up doing her own thing as a pastoral care and counselor, a clinical director. And she is joining me today from Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm so thankful to have her here with us. She has lots of specialty areas, and I'm going to let you hear that directly from her in a little bit. But first, I want to tell you about the topic of today's podcast. Today's podcast is entitled, Why Am I Still in This Relationship? Many of us therapists often have opportunities to talk to clients about their relationships, about any kind of stress they're having in their relationship, conflict, communication issues. And sometimes there are times when people are just wondering how to build a healthier relationship or question whether this relationship is the right relationship for them at all. And so this is a topic that we both intersect with quite a bit. And I thought it would be great for us to kick off Relationship Month with this topic. So first, I want to welcome Dr. Jones Davis. How are you this morning or this afternoon, this evening? Good night.
Hello, good afternoon, Dr. Catrice Glenn. It's so wonderful to be invited to this space for this conversation, just to reconnect with an old friend. We have indeed just kind of traveled together, journeyed together during our very formative professionally years. And I still remember so fondly working at the counseling center with you and all the wonderful memories from that time. I'm so happy to be here. Yeah.
Definitely.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so thankful that you took the time out today to come. This is a topic I think that we both could speak to probably for volumes based on the years of therapy that we've been doing with individuals and couples talking about relationships. But I'm curious for you, when I broached this particular topic, what thoughts did you have? What were your first thoughts?
Yeah, well, relationships are so fundamental in life, aren't they? I mean, I often say that after food, shelter, or water, basic needs, very close after are relationships. We need them to survive and to thrive. And so that being so, we also want to make sure that they're as healthy as possible, that they are as life-giving as possible, that they are not relationships that cause us harm or stress or strain at every turn. So, relationships are essential. And I know that you and I are both trained as marriage and family therapists. And for me, that choice was in part because I wanted to have that specific focus where I could address not just the individual and their own psyche and their own kind of presenting issues, but really see the relationship as the client, is what I often say, that the relationship is my client, the family is my client, the couple is my client, and really see how all of those parts work together and influence one another. And so I really focused on that in my clinical work, and am also one who had a pandemic baby, so to speak, a few years ago, and launched a platform called Relationship University that really focuses again on just that, where wanting to really equip folks with skills related to relationship wellness that sometimes can really just be a matter of not knowing, trying something that perhaps was what we learned, what we, thought was the only way perhaps to go about a thing, and really equipping people with more options for skills to improve relationships. So yeah, relationships are my jam.
I know that's right. And I'm so glad you spoke on Relationship University. I've been seeing kind of the posts that you're doing, as well as you have a beautiful website on Relationship University. We're going to give you an opportunity later on to talk about your social media platforms, but can you tell folks how they can find out more or get connected to Relationship University?
Absolutely. So I think the best way is to go to my website, ChristinaJonesDavis.com. That's a central hub that can connect you to all things that I'm up to, as well as Relationship University.
Awesome. That is great. I think one of the questions that comes up most often when I'm working with couples, most often when I'm working with someone either in a new relationship or someone who's in a relationship and it's about to, level up, is this question of, is this the right relationship for me? Oftentimes, just yesterday, I spoke with a client who's kind of going, I'm not sure I married the right person. I'm not sure. I picked, I asked God and said, hey, God, I want this person to be in church. I want them to love you. And they stopped the list right there. And sure enough, that's what they got. But now they're struggling to figure out, are there some other things I perhaps should have prayed for in my seeking and discerning about a relationship? And so I know a lot of what you've looked at is also, what are those features, those characteristics of building healthy relationship? And so one of the guiding questions that we're having in kind of a backdrop of this whole conversation is, how do I build and maintain a solid foundation? And I just like to keep that in the background of what we're talking about, because I think it's so important and imperative, particularly in romantic relationships, to take time to build something that's solid and something that can be maintained versus getting caught up in just kind of, the emotion of it or the physicality of it.
Yeah, I think that, the two things that you said that just stick out to me, and I think are so important for folks to remember, is it is building the solid foundation that matters so much, but it's also maintaining. And really, you can't have one without the other. In many cases, sometimes you might do one well, think that, I built a solid foundation, so shouldn't this be, set it and forget it? Shouldn't this kind of last as, long? Yep, done, finished with that. But that's not quite how relationships tend to work. They are just living, breathing organisms that require continued care and maintenance and nurture. And so on the other hand, you might be thinking to yourself, I'm working so hard on, the current state of the relationship, but there may have been some foundational pieces that were missed in the beginning that you can kind of really go back to and look at and examine what was our foundation. Yeah.
Exactly. And with both of us having our backgrounds in pastoral care and counseling, we recognize that, having a God relationship and some prayer life in the midst of selecting the right mate is super important. It trumps everything else in a lot of cases, to make sure that you're not just going off of a wing and a prayer or, some other characteristic that might not be sustaining. And so I'm curious for you, how do you understand or see theology kind of intersected in this particular area of specialty or work?
Yeah, I mean, that word sustaining comes to mind because I think that for persons of faith, it provides a really deep and rich resource to not put on your partner something that no human being can do for you, right? Like another human being cannot be the person who, is responsible for sustaining you, for, giving you a well of joy, a well of peace that you don't have your own connection and source to. So I think that sometimes that just gets misplaced, and people kind of, see their partners as someone who can meet those really deep core needs. And so I think when it comes to my understanding of how faith helps to kind of break down that myth of what partnership is really capable of, doing for a person. You've got to be a whole self, and then you kind of come along another whole self, and that includes a whole spiritual self. And so I think the other thing too is shared meaning is often something that I think in terms of when I think about, because more and more there are couples who might be, interreligious, interfaith, maybe one that is in that category, non-religious or agnostic, questioning. One of the frameworks that helps me, and this is kind of out of Paul Tillich's, language of ultimate concern, a theological, helpful theological concept, that how might folks join around ultimate concerns in life, in living, and in the world. And I think for couples who, I identify as Christian, who share that, you kind of have that built-in sense of guiding light and ultimate concern. And I think that there are couples who might have, again, kind of different faiths, might be in different places, but that, do you share ultimate concerns? Do you share your kind of compass in life that helps you have a shared meaning?
I think that's so important, without having some sense of grounding, some sense of familiarity to shared meaning making. I think then it just creates more barriers for us. So what does that look like in practice? That looks like, differences of morals, differences of values, differences of priorities. All of those things kind of come into play when we have to navigate honestly what those differences are about our faith and our core values, because they come up. They come up quickly usually.
They do. Yep.
And they sometimes can prevent a relationship from going past just kind of the surface, I like you, you like me situation.
Can
exactly. I trust myself with you?
Exactly. And, I think a lot of times it comes up when things happen. It may not have to do with, theological conversations or disagreements, but it's when life just gets real tough, and those tragedies or stressors and crises happen. That's when I feel like those type of concerns can either be a resource or sometimes, be an additional strain.
And I think that's when those resources get amplified, or lack of get amplified in those moments, because those are times when difficulty come, how do you approach resolution with difficulty?
Yeah.
Is it that we're just going to, kind of pull our hair out or ignore it, put our head in the sand, or are we going to mobilize a prayer life, mobilize a faith community? What are we going to do?
Yep. Yeah. And I think about that too, in terms of, one of the key areas, if I were thinking about what makes for the solid foundation, we talked about kind of the foundation and then the maintenance, but one of the two areas that I think are important for the foundation is really kind of the key topics. So one is conflict, how to navigate conflict, but the other is key topics. For which you want to be on the same page. Does that mean identical? Not necessarily. You're not a carbon copy of your partner, but you want to have had those conversations honestly. Definitely. And to be on the same page about what they mean. And I think faith and religion is a critical one in that category of, having had those conversations and being on the same page.
Right. And that almost leads us into our next area. I know like you probably, I've done my fair share of premarital counseling, and I
Mm-hmm.
recommend premarital counseling to all couples who are considering, taking the level of marriage in the relationship next. But across those relationship dynamics that come up in premarital counseling, usually there are about 10 or 12 topics, of course, faith
Mm-hmm.
being in there, but everything from communication styles to attitudes to compatibility and finances and, parenting, all of those things kind of come in
Mm-hmm.
play.
Mm-hmm.
And all of those are necessary to kind of navigate through and at least have some grounded understanding about what works in this relationship and what is healthy in this
Mm-hmm.
relationship. Because our next kind of guiding question is, how do we identify what healthy relationship goals are? What does it
Yeah.
mean to be in a healthy relationship? It doesn't mean it looks like anything necessarily you've seen. It definitely doesn't necessarily look like something you've seen on a reality show, but what does a
No.
healthy relationship look like? Healthy.
Yeah, and it's so funny. Yeah, I mean, I laugh, but the reality is,
Mhm.
that I think a lot of us are informed by relationships in, the media, including reality TV. So having models of healthy relationships sometimes is hard to find.
It
It
is.
can be kind of crowded out. So yeah, no, good question. What is a healthy relationship? And I think for me, it goes back to fundamentally a healthy relationship with oneself, first and foremost.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is, having some sense of self awareness, knowing what is, and I love, I'm going to use life giving as a term almost
Exactly.
interchangeably with, yeah,
That's
with
one of my
health because,
favorites.
yeah, right. Because you can kind of have a sense of, by taking stock on one's self, like on your own, what is it that generates, the fruit of health in your own
Mhm.
life, in your own kind of experiences. And that sometimes looks different for folks. And so that's why I
Right.
say, there is a lot of, you, it helps a lot to have a sense of what does health look like for yourself individually, even before you can then start to chart what a healthy relationship looks like. And then I will say, once that happens, and of course, how does that happen? Well, it's kind of, practices of, whether it be your own therapy and counseling, but
Hmm.
also just, developing what I call an interior life or world where you're reflective, you're introspective, and that you're open to kind of feedback from others. If we're especially talking about relationships, it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship.
Hmm.
Any close relationship, family relationships are golden for that, right? Family will tell you like it
First.
is, right? And and not to say that that's the capital T truth, but it's this notion of, can you kind of be open to a process of understanding yourself and relationships even prior to what it might be and mean for romantic relationships. So that kind of process is important. But I would say also this is an unpopular opinion, and
Okay.
it kind of goes back to, the client that you mentioned who was asking, did I marry the right person?
Hmm.
And that is I feel that on a guttural level, just kind of the anguish that can really cause when someone is looking at their partner, they're looking at perhaps, all they've invested and that kind of thing, and wondering, did I make the right decision? I mean,
Right.
is it worthwhile to keep working on this, or is there maybe another person that this would flow more smoothly with? I don't, those type of questions are not uncommon. And here's what I would say that might be unpopular. I don't know that that's where I would put the emphasis on the right person. I instead would put the emphasis on how, as a couple, are we able to respond to and have a right, if we have to use the word right,
Mm-hmm.
a right and satisfactory way of responding to the challenges that we're facing, because every couple will have challenges, and
Everyone.
I'm I'm certainly everyone, and I'm certainly, not saying there's not a line of unhealth, and certainly if there's violence involved, right, if there's abuse involved, like these are clear lines where, some types of dishealth or unhealth are not to be considered, tolerable. Certainly not,
Mm-hmm.
in an enduring long-term way if a person's not taking accountability for that. So I think there's this piece, though, about what I feel is often a myth, that there's going to be this right person that's going to make being in a relationship easy. And I know that that's not always.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's rom-com season. It's Christmas rom-com.
Yes,
Everybody's trying to
they are
get,
everywhere.
the perfect scenario, the falling snow, and the
Yes.
savior.
Oh my goodness.
But I
Yep.
think it
Yep.
also speaks a lot to this misnotion that healthy
Mm-hmm.
equals perfect. Like, I see so
Yeah.
many,
Yeah.
quotes of relationship goals online, and I'm like, but you
Yeah.
don't know that relationship. You don't
Yeah.
know what those struggles are. Oh, I don't want it if it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
look like this. You don't know what you
Mm-hmm.
might be missing. You don't know,
Yeah.
no matter what relationship it is, and even the healthiest relationships have to work at it. Even the healthiest
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
relationships go through bouts where you're not even
Yeah.
sure you like this person. You're not even sure you want to be around
Yeah.
this person, but you've
Yeah.
decided, that you are committed to this process of loving this person each day.
Mm-hmm.
And those
Yeah.
commitments help make that relationship healthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that commitment is so critical. And I think that's perhaps, what certainly it's a conversation to have at the outset about what it means to be committed through the ups and downs. Because to me, there's just like you said, there's always going to be these times where it's not seemingly flowing as you thought or as you would like. And commitment would then require, like, how do we get better at the process of addressing the things that are not going our way? So I'm a Gottman trained therapist, and I often quote some of the research from the Gottman Institute.
Mm-hmm.
John and Julie Gottman are kind of a married couple that have studied couples over the course of some decades now. And one of the things that is interesting out of their research is that couples who are stating and reporting satisfaction and high levels of satisfaction are not reporting that they have solved their problems. That in fact, they report that they have the same problems that they started out with in the beginning of their relationship. They haven't gotten somehow masterful at putting those problems away, resolving them, wiping their hands clean. But what they have done is they worked on how they approach them. They worked on how they, respond, both in their own kind of right, like how they are responsible for themselves, but also how they respond to their partner. So to me, it's a slight shift in focus but it's an important one, where it's like, yeah, we won't always see eye to eye. These problems are going to be problems, but can we focus on how we respond?
Exactly. It's the old question, how do we navigate relationship stress? How do we navigate the times that are difficult, the challenges, the differences, just the differences in viewpoints, the differences in approaches, the differences in kind of core beliefs at times. How do we navigate through relationship stress? And that is, no matter what relationship you're in, there will be differences. There will be some rub, some conflict. And, how do you navigate that is really going to determine how healthy it becomes and how you're able to maintain it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think kind of a key piece to that, and I know I keep bringing in, the relationship one has with themselves and just how we show up in a relationship. And I think a core way of navigating relationship stress is, learning how do you, when flooded by emotions, when flooded by, the situation that's going on in the relationship, how do you take 5? How do you kind of take care of yourself? It's not to say that you're, abandoning the other person or kind of leaving conflict, avoiding it, putting it under the rug. But I think emotional regulation is so important, and learning how to connect with one's breath, or to, calm down and then come back to, because another kind of fact or outcome from some of the research from the Gottman Institute is that, we can't really be productive in conversations once we are flooded with emotion. It really limits our ability to think about options and be creative, and to, hear clearly what the other person might be saying. We're in that fight or flight. We're in this kind of, protection defense mode. And so I think that's a key way of, when things get most stressful, we've got to calm our central nervous system down and deal with stress, and then, deal with our partner. Yep. Pause, the power of the pause. Yes.
Exactly. I think you need some fresh air.
Yep. It goes a long way.
It goes a long way.
Take
and
a
it'll
walk.
calm that fresh air, and the Holy Spirit will help with that tongue.
That's right.
There's so,
sometimes that's the only thing.
The only thing,
that will help. Yeah.
Because we are reactionary a lot of times, and it's the reacting that can usually cause more of a challenge than necessary. But if we take time to learn how to respond with intentionality, is what I tell all my clients. It's about the intentional response that makes the difference. And if you can find ways to get in touch with your true intentions are, then you're more likely to have a productive conversation than whatever flipped off your brain, because that may not go well.
I love that. Intentional. Yeah. Yeah.
The more we operate with intentionality, I am a believer that it definitely helps to prevent us from derailing things unnecessarily. And, when I think about this topic, and there's just so many different directions it can always go in, right? I'm trying to think of a potential listener who might be either just starting out in a relationship, or, trying to feel it out. And they're trying to figure out, okay, so I've watched a lot of Instagram and a lot of TikToks, and everybody's got a different view on when to get out of a relationship. But the question becomes like, how do I know that this is the one to stay in? Which is a thing that constantly comes up. I mean, I have clients who are, who are struggling because, as they tell me, it's hard out there, particularly in Atlanta, where they are running into people who are not interested in relationships. They want situationships. They want, friends with benefits. They want, various things, but they aren't openly communicating that. And my concern is for the person who's like, hey, I think I have something solid. I think this might be what I want to move toward, but I'm not sure how I should be moving toward it, or if this is the right thing for me. And I know that's such a big, open window, but I'm wondering, what are your thoughts? I know, because it's like we don't have a crystal ball,
Yeah,
some things just need prayer and fasting. But when these questions come up, I kind of similarly talk about what you talked about earlier, which is one, getting in touch with self, so that you're aware of what your needs are and kind of what you're looking for. And definitely making sure that you've connected with spirituality or God, if that helps you in discerning what's real. Are there any other things that you maybe perhaps lead people to or encourage them to think about when they're in that decision-making process?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because it is so personal, and I can kind of share what I try not to do first. And that is, I try not to make those decisions for someone, and
Exactly.
to trust that, in the process of that active discernment, that really trust that the clarity will come. And it may not come quickly, but to really journey with people, asking tough questions. The questions themselves are not going to, like, if there's something that's not being said, not being, put on the table, that doesn't do anyone any favors. Getting brutally honest about what are the needs, what are the things that are not, the needs are not being met, what are the wants, what are you looking for? And of course, taking a look at relationship history and relationship patterns, because sometimes when I hear that question about why am I still in this relationship, sometimes we look back at our family of origin, we look back at prior relationships, and we can see that there's a pattern that might be replaying that is not necessarily serving the person.
Right.
And so building this kind of awareness over, is this kind of a part of a undesirable pattern that has you feeling stuck because it's familiar, and that's what the connection is about. Those are questions that I would explore. I would also explore, you mentioned it's hard out there. I mean, I understand that, I get that. And I think the motivation, right, cannot be in order to run from something else, that's why I'm with this person. I really think it's important to lead with, am I drawn to this person for this person's sake, not trying to avoid something else. And so there are just ways that I think those kind of questions and explorations sometimes lead in the process of therapy to that inner knowing. The person has their clarity about, even if it's a pattern that may not be serving them, that doesn't mean that they need to leave the relationship necessarily. It could mean that they can break that pattern while with the person. It will take some work, but, it's a very personal decision.
And, not to make light of it, but as folks would say, this is cuffing season per Beyonce. And so right now you have a situation where people are just engaging in relationships that they may not feel have longevity. But sometimes the more you're around something, you can kind of convince yourself that, maybe this is more than it is. And people, as they say, sometimes get caught up. They start in something that they recognize might not be a good long-term option, but then they're like, well, it's here. I'm familiar with it. And some of those past struggles that they might have had in relationships trigger them to make some decisions about a relationship. And so those questions come up. Am I in the right thing? Should I leave? When, their gut, their spirit, their lunch would have told them, no, this is not what you need. But hey, we can convince ourselves of a lot of different things when things get familiar and comfortable.
Yeah. And cuffing season, hey, I don't have any issue. I think that your point is really important, though. It's kind of like if and when some of those kind of feelings might shift, it might be a little complex to kind of be honest about that and, figure things out. But I think that comfort is not necessarily, a bad thing. And certainly commitment is not always, what's on the menu, right? If there are times when, someone is for a season and a reason and not for a lifetime. And I think it's
love that theological bow that you put on that. That's beautiful.
Listen, some things are not for a lifetime, and to be willing to release them and know what it was that the reason the paths crossed in the first place. And so, I think those distinctions are helpful when it comes to should I leave?
This has been such a great conversation. I almost hate to end it. I do want to ask, just for you personally, like what tied this passion in for you? Like, this desire. I know we've been trained as like licensed marriage therapists, but you sound like you have a passion for this work. Where does that come from for you?
Yeah, I do. And I think for me, especially the integration of theology and counseling, I really think that started at home, watching my dad, because he was a pastor of pastoral care. And so I think that it may have been called, something else. But that's essentially, right, the discipline that I went into, because I just observed the importance of not just the proclaimed word on Sunday morning from the pulpit, but that walking alongside people through the ups and downs, right? Like the high points, the weddings, but also at the low points, the funerals, that pastoral care that I really witnessed from him led me to counseling. And because it was, of course, in a church context, I also put those two together seamlessly. So having experienced my own call to ministry around the same time when I was pursuing counseling, the two just went hand in hand for me as well. I'd seen it demonstrated, and I have found that they both offer different tools, different kind of lenses, but that they really do support one another.
I think that representation matters, of course, in our area. There are so few of us that integrate in this pastoral care and counseling space. I can't even imagine what percentage we are of mental health clinicians around the country. But I would wager a guess that we're definitely less than 5. We're those who have found this pathway forward that integrates, our understanding and the study of God and God's faith and God's people, walking alongside therapy and psychotherapy and the healing process of that. And so for us, I think it is always deeper. It is always looking to see where those intersection points are that fuel kind of how we see a situation by looking at it through these dual lenses. And so I just think it's super important for everyone, if they have an opportunity, to do the inward looking that you're talking about. With their relationships, because the first relationship, of course, is with self, making sure that you have gotten that relationship healthy before attempting to add someone else to the mix and try to get healthy in a relationship with them. All right. And if you like to find Dr. Christina Jones Davis, she's going to give you some information in a minute about how to reach her and how to find her on her social media platforms. But just as a reminder, the Reverend Dr. Christina Jones Davis is the clinical assistant professor of pastoral theology and marriage family therapy at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, Indiana. She holds a doctorate of theology, as I do, in pastoral care and counseling from Emory University, as well as she attended Emory for her Master's of Divinity and her bachelor's degree. We're so thankful that she has come. For more information on her Relationship University, she's going to give you all of her information. And we thank you again so much for coming.
Yeah. If folks want to find me, the best way is my website, ChristinaJonesDavis.com. There you can find all the things that I'm up to these days, as well as links to socials and to Relationship University. It's an online platform that makes having skills for improving your relationship accessible and convenient. You can also find me on Instagram at relationship_university and at Christina Jones Davis.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for being here. Next week, make sure that you all come back for our next episode, which will be episode 6. We have the Reverend Dr. J. Peabody, who will be speaking to us on forgiveness. That's going to be a great conversation as well. I look forward to seeing you all. Until then, be well and be blessed. Take care.
Theotherapist Podcast, real talk at the intersection of theology and therapy. Check out Dr. Glenn's new journal series titled Brain Dump Journals for the Busy, available on Amazon. Visit our websites for more information at thetheotherapist.com or catriceglenn.com.